The government is responsible for supporting its citizens during crisis.
But we cannot rely only on the government to support us in the time of a national crisis.
The American Religious Town Hall is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here is your host and moderator.
Welcome, viewers. We are very pleased that you've joined us today. We have a very important conversation, and my name is Andrea Lux, and I'm today's moderator. And I will invite our panel to introduce themselves to you.
I am Bishop Michael OLSON, and I serve as the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth, Texas.
My name is Rabbi Dan Levin. I serve as Senior Rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
I'm Tom Plumbley. I am the Senior Minister at First Christian Church, Fort Worth, Texas. We're a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
Hi, I'm Carl Troval. I'm Professor of Ethics and History at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
Thank you, panel. And now to our topic for today. Many adult incomes have been devastated due to COVID-19. Consequently, many older Americans whose employment have been adversely affected by this pandemic say they have or may have to delay their retirement. These same older Americans who have faced potential job loss or pay cuts could face a delay in retirement. 40% of American adults say they or someone in their household has lost their job or wages since the outbreak of COVID-19. People of liberal political persuasion are more likely to point to the federal government as having the greatest responsibility to meet their basic economic needs during this global pandemic. So as we reflect on 10% of the world's population contracting COVID-19, let's consider the following questions. 1. How can and should churches offer support their members through this challenging economic time? Secondly, what responsibility do employers have to respond to their employees' unique challenges? And finally, is the government totally responsible to help American people get back to an economic normal? Now let's get back to those that first introduced our topic and explore this a bit further.
Well, first of all, I said the government is responsible for supporting its citizens through crisis. And I don't think it's only the responsibility of the government. Obviously, the responsibility is widely shared. But the purpose of a government is to be there in the case as a safety net for people, so that way when any of us might fall through a safety net because of a crisis or another reason, that our government is there collectively to help a person, to support them to the point of them being able to then take on the responsibility for themselves. In other words, there's a lot of things we can take care of for ourselves that we don't necessarily need the government help, other than the broader concerns of having laws and ensuring that people have just transactions. But all of us run into those times in our lives, either those thrust upon us through natural disaster perhaps, or through COVID-19 crisis, or perhaps a medical tragedy in which we're just unable to support ourselves and which we need to turn to the community to help. I would hope that our common good would be strong enough in our society that we wouldn't have only to rely upon the government to do that, but because I do hope that there would be a place for other charities, for churches, synagogues, other people of faith and goodwill to also help, particularly to give a personal touch to the help. But sometimes the needs are so great that there's no way that private charity can possibly help certain kinds of crises. And I think the COVID-19 is an example of that. And I suppose we could spend a lot of time in details about what specific help and what not, but I think as a general principle, it's important that the government step up in time of crisis to help people, much like historically we've done and have done in the Great Depression.
So I would certainly agree with you, Carl, that the government can do certain things that private organizations can't. But I fear that if we rely solely on the government to step in and to solve problems of taking care of the vulnerable and the weak, even in the case of a natural disaster or a natural crisis like what we face with COVID-19, then we're going to create a situation in our society where we assume the government will solve all our problems, and we, individual citizens and members of the collective communities in which we belong, are not going to feel that we have our own responsibility to help take care of those issues. So I'm mindful of the fact that in the book of Exodus, book of Leviticus, book of Deuteronomy, there are precepts that teach us that taking care of the vulnerable is a collective responsibility. So in chapter 19 of the book of Leviticus, when it says you harvest your field, you have to leave the edges unharvested and you have to leave the gleanings on the ground. They are for the vulnerable, they're for the poor, they're for the stranger, those who can't take care of themselves. The text teaches that when you see even your enemy's donkey lying fallen under its load, you're not allowed to stand idly by. You have to surely help your enemy lift it. So you don't just help the people you like. You don't just help the people who are near to you. It is a collective responsibility that when you see people who are in trouble, that you help them. And I believe that that's really where the holy work of citizenship is fashioned. I remember years ago when Hurricane Katrina hit, our congregation filled an entire 18-wheeler with supplies to send to people we did not know in Mississippi to help people who were affected by, and I have to tell you, people in my congregation still talk about the spiritual impact of spending those days. Believe me, it was pretty oppressive in South Florida in late August in an unconditioned trailer. But the idea of being able to help make a difference in the life of somebody else was really, in many ways, spiritually transformative. And I fear that if we keep saying, oh, it's the government's responsibility, we take our personal, spiritual, and moral responsibility and offload it to this nameless, faceless entity called the government, and that will cause the unraveling of the fabric of society.
Good. Tom?
Yeah, I think you're both right. I think that the important thing to remember is that in a time of crisis such as this, everyone has responsibility. How about Forbes magazine carried a very interesting article not long ago in which it outlined some things that the government can do, some things that corporations can do, and some things that individuals can do. But for me, the important thing is to realize that God is at work even in the worst of times. Our faith tells us that, and that our responsibility is to find out to discern what God is doing, and to match our actions to that. And so, in that sense, response to crises can be very spiritually invigorating times because God is doing new things. Not that God caused the crisis. We don't want to go there, but that in response to the bad things that are going on, God is at work, and we can be a part of that. And you know, in our system of government, the government is us. And so the government, we as a people have a responsibility. But the government does not do it all, should not do it all, and we can gain, as Rabbi LEVIN said, we can gain so much more when we get involved, either either corporately as our businesses, or through our smaller corporations, our nonprofits, our churches, our synagogues, our religious institutions, or as individuals, just doing the small things like looking out for the neighbor next door while she's out looking and taking care of her kids while she's out looking for a job to replace the one that she lost because of COVID. All of those things are a part of being a part of helping each other. And when we turn our thoughts in those directions, and not in the directions of how can I take advantage of the poor situation that someone else is in, but rather how can I be a part of helping that person get out of their poor situation. That is a principle that I think so many of our religious traditions teach.
Thank you. Bishop.
I think this is a very good conversation, and I really agree with most everything that's been said here. One of the things I'd like to focus on a little bit, I think that is relevant to the topic here before us, is the dignity of labor and the dignity of work that people, human beings, in a sense, require work. I mean, and to be participants in society that way, to provide for their family. And what concerns me recently has been the high number of people who aren't working and who, with small businesses, aren't able to staff their business because there's nobody willing to work. And some of that is a side effect of a larger amount of money given to people for not working, all right, instead of trying to help them return to employment of some sort. And I think that's where government gets in the way of human flourishing. Now that's a rarity, but and I agree with government having a responsibility as a safety net, especially for those things that cannot be provided by smaller associations or the family or the church. But there's also and there is a responsibility on the part of the church. The facelessness of the government, I think, matches many times people's understandings of taxation. That taxes are an imposition somehow, and my job is to try to not pay them, all right, or to pay as little bit of them because they don't see the fruit of what your money goes for so often, or don't make the connection. And then the problem, they say, well, the church ought to take care of that. And I'm like, great. What are you going to put in the plate to help us to do this together? Because sometimes people confuse things like charity care or charity work with no cost. They're different, or bad debt. Charity care is where the whole church as a community comes together, pools the resources, if you will, and directs for the alleviation of suffering and the return of free participation in the society. And I think we lose that very frequently on this. And that's now, having gone through this crisis, I think that might be something for us all to focus on, is how do we get people out of poverty and and into an interdependent relationship with the rest of the community.
Yeah.
Yeah, Carl.
Well, I do think that there needs to be always the mediating institutions, whatever those look like, right? That connect the individual ultimately to larger structures like the government, whether they're religious organizations or charities or however we want to organize. And I appreciate your comments about dignity of labor. I think where I get concerned is that even if you tally up all of the charitable possibilities of every organization, it just doesn't come close to meeting the human need that people have now. I mean, there's this illusion that somehow if just we turned it all over to private, I mean, I know none of you are saying that, but that the need is just too great. And so, and how, I think the other piece that I'm always struggling with is, the structural nature of how these things are administrated too, because mean, I gotta check with everybody else. I'll be honest, I didn't need the check. I mean, my wife and I talked about it, and we just decided to give it away, right, to someone who could help do something with it because we didn't need it. Well, then I'm going, well, why shouldn't this be going to somewhere where there's need for people? So I can understand the frustration that government isn't always the best manager of things either.
But I would add to that, I think we're all sort of agreeing with the government, it's yes and. Mm-hmm. But I think that there are a lot of things that the government can do that incentivize communities and individuals to do things individually to try to make a difference. So for example, the government can say, yes, we know you need to take a mandatory distribution from your IRA, but you can avoid taxation, in fact, take a deduction on your taxes if you use that IRA and give it directly to a charitable organization that's trying to make a difference or do something good. Yeah. So, I think there are things, Carl, that you talked about that the government can do that because of its size and its depth and its breadth that private organizations just can't, no matter how good Catholic charities are at things, no matter how good Jewish Family Services is in a particular community. There are things the government can do. It's like, we've done a capital campaign to do an expansion to our building, and you go to somebody and you say, hey, do you want to contribute? Yeah, they want to contribute to something they can see. But no one sort of says, you know what I want to contribute to? The wiring behind the wall. I don't want to contribute to the plumbing under the floor, right? But if those things aren't there, the building doesn't work. And I think sometimes we forget that part of what the government does is all of those not particularly glorious things that you need for a society to be able to function.
So could I ask you something here? I want to pick up on Bishop Olson's comment about so many people being out of work. In the development world, we often talk about the fact that we shouldn't be giving out stuff all the time. But the role of helping people is actually to support them, to re-engage them in order for them to then be successful on their own, right? So when we talk about the support we should give here as faith communities in this kind of environment, do you think there's been too much focus on just the giving out?
Well, let me answer it by in this way, by saying that I think that pandemic time has accentuated the very inequalities that we regret so much about our society. Those who do work hard but are at their lowest end of the economic spectrum regardless, those are the folks that got hurt the most. Those who were last hired were the first fired. And those women just getting into the workforce took it on the chin more at a greater rate. Some of those sort of inequalities that are baked into the system got accentuated in pandemic time, and I think one of the great opportunities that we have at this point, governmentally, corporately, and every other way, is to use this time as a way to correct some of that stuff, which I think will contribute to that understanding of the dignity of work.
I would just add very quickly that I think that that's where government can play a really crucial role in incentivizing certain behaviors, incentivizing people to go back to work if they're able to get into the workforce. I think we do have to be conscious about the fact, though, especially as people get older, sometimes it's much more difficult to get back into the workforce. People take a resume and they look and they sort of do the math in their head and they say, oh, that person is 62 years old. And they engage in some ageism, which makes it, I think, an additional burden to the people that you had talked about in your opening statement that are, I think, maybe even more vulnerable than people who are a little bit younger.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's take a break.
We hope you're enjoying today's program. If you'd like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the vision and history of the program, and we invite you to become a ministry partner, explore our Town Hall Estates healthcare facilities, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, we look forward to receiving your letters. You may write us at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. If you have a prayer request, please send it to prayerrequest@americanreligious.org. Thank you for writing and thank you for watching. Now, back to today's closing statements.
Welcome back, everyone. And as you can see, what maybe has seemed a simple question is actually much more complex when we get into it. So I'm going to turn now to the panelists for their closing comments.
In 1891, Pope Leo XIII wrote the encyclical entitled Rerum Novarum, or Concerning New Things, which really was an articulation of the social gospel of the church for modern times. It spoke of a poverty that is blessed and a poverty that is oppressive, which has rung true throughout the 20th century and now into the 21st century. What we see is one of the burdens of poverty is the isolation and the inability to be able to be part of a broader society, to make a contribution. One of the things associations like churches can do is assist people through case management, assistance in credit management, other sorts of coaching that can help affirm some people in order to deal with poverty in return, to be debt-free and to be contributors and flourishing as single parents, as whole families as well.
For people in the Christian community, I think the question always is, how does one who is committed to Jesus' values respond? In a time of crisis, particularly a crisis as widespread throughout not only this nation, but throughout the world, how does one respond out of a sense of values that is based in good news for the poor and freedom for the oppressed, and setting at liberty those who have been imprisoned in all sorts of prisons, declaring God's Jubilee time. How does one match one's activities personally or in terms of the faith group that one is a part of, or in terms of the governmental actions that one demands from our government? How do we build those kinds of values into the actions that we take?
I wanted to also talk a little bit more about another way that government also helps, and that's just policy, making certain kinds of decisions. I mean, we're just talking about handing out and helping people, but I think sometimes even just policy decisions about how to make decisions are going to have great effect. It isn't as if there are people who are in favor of government regulation of markets and those who aren't. Everyone's in favor of how the government, in every scenario, the government regulates markets. And so I think it's a question about how one regulates the markets so that it serves not just the interests of the most wealthy, but serves the interest of everybody, and especially the most vulnerable. I mean, I'm even thinking of a simple thing like mandating that everyone be, when you get hired, that you give people the option of a retirement plan, but that you're automatically opted in and that people have to opt out of a retirement plan. I've heard that actually increases the security of people over time significantly, and they've done nothing and not even taken away a freedom. It's just that simple policy change that has great effect.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree certainly with all of those things. I'm reminded of the work of the sociologist Robert Putnam, who's written some tremendous books, Bowling Alone, Our Kids, and he really talks about the challenges that we face as a society when you see the decline in social capital, when you see the decline in people thinking of our society as a collective and thinking more about our society as, well, I need to worry about me, myself, and I. And I think that the more that we can teach ourselves and to teach the people in our communities to look outside of the boundaries of our own homes and our own cares and needs, to say, hey, what happens to somebody else who may be in need or vulnerable is my responsibility, that society is a collective responsibility, I think will promote a stronger social fabric. The other thing that I think is important for us to remember is that faith in government is built when the government acts faithfully. And I think that there are times that we get cynical about the ability of government to do good things when we see government not acting in an efficient or responsible or caring manner. But on the other hand, when you see government act well, either through good policy or through good actions, whether it's FEMA in the case of a natural disaster or other agencies who are assisting in helping promote good policies that promote safety and goodness, we end up trusting the government more to do the right thing so that government can work in partnership with private organizations and individual citizens to help people through the vulnerability of a crisis.
Well, thank you all very much. We started with a question, really, which is who or what group is responsible in a situation such as we find ourselves in? Is it the government? Is it employers? Is it the church? Faith communities in general, or is it individuals? And I think the answer to that we've heard is yes, 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 and yes. It really is. It really is that corporate engagement. And so I don't know, listener, where you are and what role you have. But I think that is something that we all should be asking ourselves, whatever parts of these groups we belong to. What is it that I can do to improve the situation of someone over there who is vulnerable or who is suffering from whatever is going on? And that doesn't necessarily mean we have to be rich to do that. It's not all about giving away something to them. It is much more intrinsic than that to their whole being and livelihood. So thank you all very much for a great conversation. And the Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestant Jews, educators and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory but in reality. And so now, friends, until next week, at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.